Good evening. I'm Katrine, and I'm going to tell you the story of my first kiss and how it was related with some really serious incident in my life. It was the day before my 13th birthday, and I was on my way to school. And I was so much looking forward to this birthday. I had a lot of fights with my Catholic parents about having a birthday party, but I really wanted it and I achieved it. And so it was going to be real Coke and party in the party cellar. Maybe you remember in the 80s we had these strange party cellars. And I especially bought this Langspielplatte from La Boom, from that French movie. And all of this was because I really wanted to be kissed. I really wanted my first kiss. And so I was thinking about this, and I was driving my bicycle, and then I heard a rattling sound from the front wheel. And instead of stopping and having a look, I acted out my parents' mantra, if I ignore it, it will be fine. And I went on, and suddenly something blocked the front wheel, and I flew over the steering wheel, and I fell on my first time on my chin. I didn't feel a pain then. I just heard a noise, a big noise in my head, like a big branch breaking. And I got up, and the first thing I thought was, what's going to happen to my birthday party? So a stranger behind me had seen the accident, and he had stopped the car. He was terrified. He helped me into his car. Those were the 80s, and that's what you did. You would just go into strangers' cars. And he drove me to the next doctor. And that doctor happened to be Wolfgang, and Wolfgang was a friend of my parents. And Wolfgang really dreamed of a life as a professional tennis player. You could always see his tennis clothes underneath his Arztkittel. And he wasn't really so much into being a doctor. So he always had this bored look on his face. And I was laying there with all the blood and the pain growing inside my face. And I realized that there's only one thing worse than a bored doctor's face, and that's a terrified face. So he was really terrified, and he transported me to the next hospital, which was a small town hospital, like a really tiny hospital. And that's where I spent my first birthday, my 13th birthday. And there were no candles, and I couldn't eat the birthday cake. And there came a lot of classmates, and they brought their presents, but they couldn't really console me because I had dreamt of something else, and I could see the shock in their eyes, although they tried to hide it. So it really wasn't a good birthday. And especially in the evening, I had realized when I was alone, I really have to look into the mirror. So I got up, went over to the sink where there was the mirror over it, and I looked into the mirror, and I didn't recognize myself. All I recognized were the eyes, and the rest was like a big swollen moon, like half a moon face. And I was sure there was no kissing that day. And so a few days passed on, and nothing happened in that hospital. So I said, so what's happening? What are you doing with me? Something's wrong, right? And then they said, oh yeah, well, we never had something complicated like this. We better transport you to another hospital. So I was brought to this really big, fancy clinicum in Aachen. I'm not sure if maybe you have seen pictures. It's really huge. It looks like a flying Centre Pompidou spaceship. It's very famous for its architecture, and it looks like the inside has been pulled out and turned around, and that's not a very good look for a building, especially not a hospital. But there I was, just 13, and there was Professor Dr. Coburg, and he looked at my x-ray, then he looked at me and he said, "Your jaw is not shattered." And I thought, oh, thank God. He said, "It's shattered into many pieces." And, oh sorry, it has a good ending, sorry. It's shattered into many pieces. And if we don't do anything, it will grow crooked. And you might have problems talking and eating. And as talking is one of our favorite things in the world. But if we operate, there's a 50-50 chance that we will touch the face nerve. And then your face will be paralyzed. And my mother started to cry immediately, and just the way he looked at me, he made it clear I was going to make the decision. And I could see that he treated me with all the respect, and he could see the pain and the fear, and he just treated me like an equal. And I said, "I want this operation if you are going to do it." So that was decided on, and I had a few days to wait for the operation, and these were the weirdest days of my life. Because in a split of a second, my whole normal country girl life had turned upside down, and I was in circumstances that I didn't expect. And I was in the facial, what do you call it? Plastic facial surgery section. And these were the middle of the 80s, and there were a lot of men. And these men were from the Iraq War. And I can tell you, these guys had a lot worse problems than I had. Because I remember one man, he didn't have a nose, and another one, he was missing half of his face. And that was just too much for me as a girl. And when I went out of my room, I would always go the corridor looking at my feet, because I just couldn't stand it. So what helped me, as I was a very good Catholic girl back then, now I'm a more pagan Catholic girl, I went to the chapel, and I made a deal with God. And I said, "Dear God, let me have a face that people like to look at. And I promise you, I will not think of boys ever again. I will not write secret love letters, and I will not think of kissing for the rest of my life." Or then I said, or maybe at least until I'm 18. Okay, so I went back to my room, and my mother called me, and she said, "You know what, Katrine? Guess who's in hospital?" And it sounded like there's a big party going on. So then she said, "It's Marcus. He's about to lose his eyesight." And I felt sad for Marcus, but I felt really happy for myself, because I wasn't alone there. And Marcus was a boy from school, and I knew him from the first grade. He was handicapped. He had he didn't hear so well. And his mother had asked me if I would sit next to him so he wasn't feeling so lonely or bullied or something. And Marcus didn't only have problems hearing. He was, because of that, he was a very aggressive guy, and he would always get into fights with other boys. And when he saw a fight coming, he would come to me and give me his hearing aids. So I had the hearing aids in one hand, the sandwich in the other hand, and the hearing aids, they were always kind of yellowish, you know. So I had a pretty clear imagination what was going on in his ears. So I was eating my sandwich, watching the fight, and I was always very happy that he never beat me. So once you've done that to a boy, you feel really comfortable with that person. And so we were together, and of course we were so afraid, and we were in a really strange circumstance or phase of our life. But we were together, and we didn't even talk about our fears. We were just killing time together. And then there was the night before the operation, and I was really afraid, and we were both so lonely and so afraid that we just decided we would just run around in the hospital, because nobody gave a shit anyway. It was huge and there was nobody, and you could just do whatever you wanted to. So we were doing all sorts of things. We were taking toilet paper and throwing it along these hundreds of meters of corridors. And we found half a package of Mon Chéri. That's another 80s thing. Maybe it still exists today, but it was very 80s. And we didn't like the liquid, the schnapps inside so much, but we liked the chocolate, so we ate it anyway. And we went to the chapel together to make our final deals with God. And in the chapel we lighted all the candles without paying, and I just did the best out of the situation. And at some stage he turned to me and said, "You know what, Katrine, I envy you." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I'd rather look horrible than getting blind." And I said, "But I would much rather be blind than looking awful." And he said, "You know what, the good thing is, when I'm blind, at least I don't have to see your ugly face." and of course, we laughed. We laughed, and then I cried. And he said, "Why do you cry?" I said, "I haven't been kissed, you know." And then he took me by my shoulders. He put his arms on my shoulders, and my hair got tangled in his hands, but I didn't bother. And then he leaned over and put his lips on my lips. And then he didn't move. And we just had our lips to each other for a little while, and then he moved back. And I can't say it was as beautiful as I'd always imagined it, but it felt like a proper kiss. So the next morning, we were brought to the cellar, for the operations took place in the cellar. Sorry, I have to. And everybody was so nice to me. The doctors were just the most beautiful people in the world. And they were making jokes and making fun. And it was just so wonderful of them to do that. And I'll never forget that. And while I was losing conscience, sorry, I only could trust. I could give myself and trust, because that what would happen in the next hours would change my life forever. So many hours later, I woke up and I couldn't open my eye, but I could hear, and I heard the professor talk to my parents. And he said, "Everything went really well." And at that moment, it was just like a warm, bright light around me. I couldn't see, but I felt this incredible light around me and inside me. And it felt like God was taking me in his arms. And I remember thinking, that's what sex must feel like. Thank you.